Welcome to the Deep Dive, where we take a stack of complex sources, strip away all the noise, and really just hand you the powerful insights you need to upgrade how you navigate the world.
And our mission today is pretty fundamental. We are going to completely overhaul the concept of the routine.
Right.
We really need to move it out of this, restrictive box of discipline and willpower and put it where it belongs.
Which is where?
In the high-leverage field of neurological system design.
System design. I love that framing because that's the core theme of this dive, isn't it? We're so often conditioned to see routine as rigidity.
Yeah, like a tight leash on our freedom, on our creativity.
Exactly. But the sources we've pulled together today, and we're talking about neuroeconomics, computational neuroscience, sleep research, they tell a completely different story, a totally counterintuitive one.
They really do. The science reveals this profound paradox. When you intentionally, strategically reduce the number of decisions you have to make every day.
You don't get less free.
You don't. You massively expand your cognitive bandwidth. You're basically designing these incredibly efficient systems to counteract the enormous, and I mean measurable, biological cost of just thinking.
So today we're going to explain how your brain actually computes effort, why that feeling of fatigue is probably not what you think it is, and how you can stop relying on just, brute force willpower and start operating like a brilliantly optimized machine.
Yeah, let's unpack it. And I think we have to start with the most fundamental fact of all, the brain's massive operational budget.
The cost of keeping the lights on.
So to really appreciate why routines are so powerful, you first have to recognize the physiological limits of our hardware. The human brain is a metabolic marvel, but it is an unbelievably expensive engine to run.
Okay, give us the numbers. What are we actually paying, metabolically speaking, just to be conscious?
Okay, get this. The brain, it's roughly 2% of our total body weight, right?
Yeah, give or take.
But it consumes an astonishing 20% of the body's total energy resources. We're talking glucose and oxygen at rest.
20%.
20%. And for an infant who's doing all this intense learning and structural growth, that number can spike to nearly 50%.
50? Wow.
It is, by far, the most resource-intensive organ in the entire body.
So 1/5 of everything I eat today is basically going to power this 3-pound lump of gray matter.
Pretty much. And that establishes our base cost. But here's the part of the research that just completely changes the conversation. It's what we can call the 5% rule.
Okay.
Yes. So when we engage in those really effortful, goal-directed cognitive tasks, the complex decision-making, the problem-solving, that deep focus that feels utterly exhausting.
The stuff that makes you feel like you've run a marathon.
Exactly that stuff. Studies using advanced neuroimaging, PA scans, MRIs, they show that these activities use surprisingly little additional energy.
Wait, hold on. You're telling me that if I'm just lying on the couch daydreaming versus wrestling with the single most complicated strategic problem of my career?
Yeah.
The difference in my brain's energy consumption is only about 5%.
That is the core finding.
That can't be right. It feels so much harder.
I know it feels that way. But metabolically, effortful thought taps into only about 5% more energy than the brain uses at rest. That means 95% of that enormous 20% budget is just for maintenance.
95% for maintenance. That just runs counter to every subjective feeling I've ever had of hitting a mental wall. If the metabolic difference is so tiny, why do I feel so completely spent after a few hours of intense work?
That is the crucial question, and the answer hinges on what that maintenance load actually is. What is that 95% doing?
Right.
The lion's share is for maintaining what are called membrane potentials.
Mm-hmm.
Imagine every single one of your neurons as a tiny, highly specialized battery.
Okay.
These little batteries have to maintain a very specific voltage difference across their membranes constantly. It's this nonstop ionic work, this pumping, that ensures when a signal arrives, that neuron is instantly ready to fire.
So it's the constant charging of billions and billions of tiny batteries just waiting for the command. It's standby power.
It's the ultimate standby power. And that standby power alone accounts for half of the brain's total energy budget. The brain has to be ready at any second to execute any thought, any decision. And this intense energetic demand, well, it's a huge evolutionary constraint.
So if the brain is this expensive to run, evolution didn't optimize it for just maximum output, for thinking as much as possible.
No, not at all. It optimized for maximum efficiency. The whole system evolved to maximize information transmission per unit of ATP spent. It's a system built on efficiency, not excess. And that brings us back to your question.
Why do I feel so tired?
That feeling we call mental fatigue is an adaptive evolutionary signal. It's a biological governor. It's not necessarily a sign that your body is physically depleted. It's a high-level warning from your brain to preserve resources.
So it's not I'm empty, it's stop spending so much on this.
Exactly. Stop spending this high-cost processing power on things that could and should be automated.
This frame shift is it's radical. We're moving away from that old sort of simple idea of willpower depletion.
The empty fuel tank model.
Yeah, the empty fuel tank, which always felt like we were just running out of a single resource, maybe glucose. But our sources are strongly suggesting the mechanism is, well, it's a lot more sophisticated than just a simple fuel gauge.
Yeah, we have to reject that simple resource depletion model. I mean, of course, severe hypoglycemia, really low blood sugar, that clearly impairs function. Nobody's debating that.
Sure.
But the mild metabolic shifts they measure during typical demanding cognitive work are just. They're too small to explain the steep performance drops and that profound feeling of effort we all experience.
So if it's not a global fuel outage, what is that feeling of effort actually signaling?
And that brings us to this really fascinating neuroeconomic perspective. Effort as opportunity cost.
Okay, break that down.
The sensation of mental effort, that aversive, weary feeling that we all dread, it's the conscious output of mechanisms in your brain that are designed to measure the opportunity costs of doing what you're doing right now.
So the brain isn't saying, I have no fuel left.
No. It's saying the computational expenditure required for this specific task right now is too high relative to the potential benefit, and I could be using these precious resources much better somewhere else.
It's like having an internal financial advisor who's constantly trying to optimize your resource allocation over time. So the fatigue is actually a, a motivational signal.
A motivational signal, yes. It's designed to prompt us to reallocate our most expensive resource, our executive function, away from the current task and towards something that yields a greater benefit.
And the proof of this model is in how easily we can reverse that fatigue.
That's the power of it, exactly. Computational processes are dynamically allocated. They aren't destroyed with use. We know this because you can take someone who is reporting severe mental fatigue and you offer them a massive incentive, let's say $10,000, to focus intensely for just 5 more minutes. And what happens?
Their performance snaps right back.
Almost instantly. The resource wasn't gone. The motivation to spend that resource was low. A high-value reward completely changes the cost-benefit equation, and suddenly the brain is willing to pay that energy tax again.
Okay, but this still leaves the question of the physical hit. I get the high-level cost calculation, but if my whole body isn't out of glucose, what's causing the local limit? This is where the astrocytic glycogen comes in.
Right. This is the biological link. This connects the global opportunity cost model to that physical feeling of depletion. Astrocytes, which are a type of glial cell in the brain, they store glycogen.
Like muscles do.
Exactly like muscles do. And this glycogen serves as a crucial hyperlocal energy buffer. It's specifically designed to support temporary bursts of high neural activity.
So the astrocytic glycogen is the brain's local gas tank. It's built for sprints, not for marathons.
Perfectly put. When you engage in high-level cognitive function, especially things like working memory or executive control, you draw down on those very sensitive, very limited local reserves.
And those higher functions are more sensitive to running low.
Far more sensitive. Much more so than, say, basic visual processing or motor control. So that feeling of effort, which is tied to the opportunity cost, is also the system's warning that this crucial, high-priority local buffer is being drawn down too quickly or too deeply.
This gives us our marching orders for system design then. The entire point of a strategic routine is to make sure we reserve that tiny, costly 5% of cognitive energy and those sensitive local glycogen buffers exclusively for the high-return activities.
For the strategic sprints.
For the sprints, yeah, by automating everything else.
It's the ultimate energy conservation strategy. It's about ensuring you get maximum utility from your very limited metabolic bandwidth.
So now we can move to the practical application of that conservation. If effort is a calculated cost, then routines are our tools for automation. They're specifically designed to protect the brain's command center from being just overloaded by low-value, constant computational demands.
And the command center is, of course, a prefrontal cortex, the PFC.
Right.
It's the hub for all the big stuff. Planning, reasoning, error monitoring, self-control. Anytime you are performing an effortful, non-routine task, you reliably engage this executive network, which includes the lateral PFC and another area called the anterior cingulate, #2.1, the crisis of decision fatigue.
We use the phrase decision fatigue so casually, but the sources we looked at show it's a real measurable neurological event. It's a genuine impairment of the PFC.
Oh, absolutely. When the system gets overloaded by a continuous stream of conscious choices, big or small, it doesn't matter. What to wear, what to eat for lunch, which of these 100 emails to answer first.
The activity in the PFC literally dips.
It dips. And this isn't just feeling tired. It's an actual impairment in your ability to weigh options thoughtfully.
And when the PFC dips, we revert to shortcuts.
Right, you do. We become more impulsive. We start seeking immediate gratification. That's the impulse buy at the checkout, the junk food choice when you're tired. Or we resort to avoidance.
Just do nothing.
Or pick the default. Exactly. We settle for the default option. We choose the path of least resistance, even if it runs completely counter to our long-term goals. The cognitive cost of making one more good choice just exceeds the perceived value of making that choice.
It's the brain defaulting to its energy-saving mode, even if it leads to, objectively worse outcomes for us. And the sources link this chronic decision load directly to the severe systemic shutdown we call burnout.
Yes, the burnout spiral is really defined by that sustained cognitive effort occupying and just overwhelming those executive resources. And when people enter a state of burnout, we see a really striking neurological signature.
Which is?
Diminished baseline cognitive performance, for one. But what's truly critical is the compensation attempt the brain makes.
How does it compensate?
Individuals who are experiencing burnout are forced to recruit more neurological resources. We see these increased, costly frontal area responses in the brain scans, just to achieve performance levels that a non-burnt-out person could reach easily.
So they're literally paying a higher metabolic tax for the exact same output.
That's a perfect way to put it. They're running the baseline 95% plus, say, an 8% effort instead of 5% just to stay functional.
Using extra fuel to compensate for a sluggish engine.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And yet, the research is clear that even with this increased resource consumption, the system ultimately fails to fully rescue performance as the burnout gets worse. The system is just inefficiently struggling. And this is the ultimate argument for simplifying and automating your daily demands. It prevents the system from ever entering that state of chronic, costly compensation.
Okay, so even if we automate the big structural decisions, what to eat, when to exercise, we still face this constant barrage of micro decisions and task switches in the modern world. Every time we jump between tasks, we pay hidden cost. The sources call it attention residue.
And this is the invisible drain on our productivity. Attention residue happens when you switch from task A, let's say writing a report, to task B, maybe answering a critical email. A portion of your cognitive machinery remains psychologically stuck on task A. Your brain hasn't fully closed the file.
So it's like the mental equivalent of having 20 tabs open on your computer with all these background processes just draining battery power, even though you're only looking at one screen. That cognitive drag has to be expensive.
It is shockingly expensive. Some studies suggest this drag can cost up to 40% of your productive capacity.
40%.
40. This is why attempting to multitask, constantly juggling emails, Slack messages, deep work, it just weakens focus so dramatically. Every notification is a tiny decision that pulls resources away and leaves the sticky residue behind.
So we can't completely eliminate the need to switch tasks. That's just modern life.
Right.
But we can design routines specifically to manage the transition. We need, like, a mental palate cleanser.
That's exactly the utility of transition rituals.
Yeah.
And they don't have to be complicated, but they have to be intentional. They act to consciously close that open loop and clear out the residue, which allows the brain to fully load the context for the new task.
Okay, so let's talk practical application. The source has mentioned two key components: externalization and movement.
Right. So start with externalization. Before you switch tasks, take 60 to 90 seconds for a brain dump.
What's that?
You quickly write down exactly where you left off on the previous task. Note what you completed, what the very next logical step would have been, and any lingering thoughts or concerns you have about task A.
So that act of writing it down, that frees up the working memory that was being used to hold all that information.
It gives the brain permission to drop the context. You're consciously archiving the file so you know you can come back to it.
I like that. Archiving the file. What's the second part?
The second component is physical movement. Even a very short ritual, walking to the kitchen to get water, doing 3 minutes of stretching, even just stepping outside for 60 seconds, helps the brain release the previous context far more effectively than just sitting still and trying to force the mental switch.
So these little micro recovery moments, if you place them deliberately between demanding tasks, they can add up to huge reductions in that attention residue and cognitive drag.
They absolutely can. Hashtag tag 2.3, the efficiency of habit exploitation.
This all leads us to the heart of decision automation, which is the neurological shift that turns that high-cost processing into a low-cost habit. This is the trade-off between exploration and exploitation.
Right. In computational neuroscience, we frame decision-making as this kind of competition between two strategies, the model-based strategy and the model-free strategy. Routines are designed to favor the model-free approach.
Okay, let's clearly define those two systems for everyone listening, because this distinction is really central to the whole idea of system design.
Okay. The model-based system is your high-cost calculator. It's goal-directed, it's flexible. It uses a sophisticated internal model of the world to evaluate every possible outcome, even predicting the result of rare or unlikely choices.
It's like a chess computer mapping out every branching possibility.
Exactly. And it requires heavy engagement of the prefrontal cortex in an area called the dorsomedial striatum. It's slow, it's metabolically very expensive, but it's highly adaptive.
And the model-free system is the opposite. That's the routine, the habit, the muscle memory.
That's the pure exploitation strategy. It simply repeats actions that were previously rewarded, regardless of the current outcome.
Yeah.
It doesn't recalculate the entire map every time, it just executes the last successful move.
Like your hand automatically finding the right key on a piano without you having to consciously think about it.
That's a perfect analogy.
Yeah.
And neurologically, it transitions control away from the PFC and toward more efficient motor-related cortical regions and the dorsolateral striatum specifically, an area called the putamen in humans.
So strategic routines are really just the conscious decision to convert a high-cost, model-based problem like, what on earth should I eat for breakfast, into a low-cost, model-free solution.
I always eat oatmeal on weekdays.
Yeah.
You're automating what's called the first stage stay behavior. And the research completely confirms this shift happens over our lifetimes. Studies show that habitual, perseverative behavior, that tendency to just repeat the same choice over and over, it increases significantly as we mature. It reflects a natural transition from the flexible, exploratory responses we see in adolescence to more rigid but highly efficient ones in adulthood.
And that efficiency is supported by the maturation of the dopamine pathways feeding into that posterior putamen area you mentioned.
That is, it's a biological imperative. We're designed to become more computationally efficient as we age.
So decision automation is this strategic act of ceding control over the low-stakes choices. You're just taking them off the table.
And in doing so, you free up the high-cost prefrontal executive network, your most precious and sensitive cognitive asset, to engage in true model-based thinking. Strategy, innovation, flexible problem solving, all the high-value tasks that truly require that scarce 5% energy increase.
So routines maximize the utility of our limited energy resources by strategically embracing the efficiency of habit.
That's the whole game.
Okay, so we've established that energy is finite and we have to conserve it. But now we need to turn to the second crucial factor, which is when you spend that energy. Routines are the infrastructure for aligning ourselves with the brain's deep biological timing mechanisms, the circadian rhythm.
Exactly. The brain isn't a static machine. It's not the same at 9 a.m. as it is at 9 p.m. Its internal state governs all neural activity, which means that identical neurons can respond differently to the exact same stimulus depending on the time of day.
And this fluctuation is linked directly to our metabolic state and key signaling molecules. Hashtag SHAG 3.1, the time-dependent brain state.
The main molecule we need to talk about, the one that acts as the primary metabolic brake on neuronal activity and drives sleepiness, is adenosine.
Adenosine.
Adenosine is the biological accountant that links your metabolism to your feeling of fatigue. It accumulates throughout the day during prolonged wakefulness, and it acts like a chemical brake on neuronal excitability.
So more time awake equals more adenosine, which equals more sleepiness.
That's the simple equation. It's the molecular fingerprint of sustained activity.
And the sources cited this fascinating research on nocturnal animals who naturally have a reverse day-night schedule. How did that research confirm adenosine's role?
Well, the researchers measured neural excitability in the visual cortex of these animals, and they found it was at its weakest, most suppressed just before sunrise.
Which for them is like their 5 a.m., the point of peak fatigue after a full night of being active.
Right. And here's the crucial part. When they administered a drug to block the action of adenosine, that suppression of neural activity completely disappeared.
Wow. So it proved the direct link. High accumulated adenosine equals low neural excitability and peak fatigue. the break is fully engaged.
It directly connects the physiological reality of the brain's energy use over the course of a day. The state of our neural excitability is dynamic, it's governed by these biological timekeepers. And our routines have to respect these daily fluctuations, otherwise we're just fighting a molecular uphill battle. Hashtag 3.2 optimize windows for adaptation, metaplasticity.
Okay, now here is the finding that, for me, just completely upends the traditional approach to scheduling our days. We usually save our hardest, most important tasks for when we feel fresh,
First thing in the morning.
first thing in the morning. But this low excitability, peak fatigue state, it might not be a sign that the brain is failing. It might be a sign that the brain is optimized for a very specific kind of high-value work, long-term learning.
This is the concept of metaplasticity, which is basically the brain's potential for long-term potentiation, or LTP. And RTP is the cellular mechanism that underlies lasting learning and memory formation.
So it's the brain's ability to change itself.
To physically rewire. And the capacity for this fundamental change follows a very distinct daily rhythm.
And the shocking finding from the research is that this capacity seems to peak not when the brain's at its sharpest, but when it is arguably at its most tired.
That's the revolutionary takeaway. In that same nocturnal animal model, the research team found that repetitive stimulation induced a strong LTP-like enhancement, the basis for new learning at sunrise.
The period of peak fatigue and high adenosine, when neural excitability was naturally at its lowest.
That's right. And it failed to induce that same plasticity during the time we would traditionally expect learning to be optimal.
So when the animal was fresh?
Exactly. The same stimulation failed to create significant plasticity at sunset, when the brain was fresh, excitability was high, and the animal was just starting its activity cycle. The implication here is staggering.
It means the brain's capacity for deep network reorganization for structural learning is actually greatest during a protected period of peak fatigue and low neural responsiveness.
It does. Now, we have to be cautious extrapolating from an animal model to humans, but it's highly suggestive.
So what does it suggest for us?
It suggests that for humans, those deep structural changes, the true rewiring, the complex integration of abstract knowledge, might be best reserved for a window late in the day, or perhaps right before sleep, not first thing in the morning when the PFC is highly excitable.
It fundamentally challenges that whole assumption that the best time for learning is when you feel the most cognitively sharp.
It really does. It suggests we need to rethink the traditional allocation of our tasks. Maybe we should reserve that low excitability window for review, for integration, for structural learning, and save the high excitability morning for rapid decision-making, novel problem-solving, and communication. Hashtag 3.3, protective daily anchors. Morning and evening.
So, regardless of exactly when we schedule our structural learning, routines provide the necessary biological and behavioral guardrails, the daily anchors, to prevent our complex system from drifting into misalignment.
Yes, these structured days protect our health, and especially our sleep cycle. Routines function as infrastructure against that misalignment.
The sources mentioned a couple of models for this.
Right, there's the structured days hypothesis and the social Zeitgeber model. For example, the structured days hypothesis, though it's often studied in kids, it applies to adults too. A consistent structure simply fills time with known, favorable activities.
And by filling the time, it inherently limits the opportunities for those high-cost, low-value behaviors.
Correct. When your schedule is loose and lacks routine, think about a long weekend or a vacation, you naturally open up more time for what some researchers call obesogenic behaviors.
HR.
Opportunistic snacking, excessive screen use, impulse decision-making, all the things that draw down that energy budget unnecessarily.
And the most important biological anchor for our daily recovery is sleep. So our sources gave us some very specific, actionable data on how morning and evening routines can protect sleep quality.
Right, so starting the day, morning physical exercise is a clear, protective anchor. It demonstrated a concrete effect on improving sleep quality.
How so?
It specifically reduced sleep latency, which is how long it takes you to fall asleep, and it decreased the number of those frustrating nocturnal awakenings.
So prepaying your physical energy budget in the morning actually improves your brain's ability to shut down cleanly at night.
That seems to be the link. Now, the evening routine findings are where some conventional wisdom gets challenged. We usually advise winding down with, reading a book, drinking some herbal tea, dimming the lights. Yet, in the study population, these exact behaviors were associated with longer sleep latency.
That is a huge surprise. I mean, if it's not the light and it's not the soothing quality of the tea, what mechanism from our deep dive could possibly explain why these attempts at relaxation actually delay sleep?
The sources don't offer a definitive mechanism, but we can apply the neuroeconomic principles we've been discussing. Think about the nature of those tasks. If you're reading a complex, engaging novel or a challenging work document before bed.
You're engaging in model-based thinking.
Exactly. You're mentally mapping out plot lines, you're evaluating characters, you're synthesizing complex information. All of that requires active PFC engagement right up until the moment you want the PFC to shut down for sleep.
You're activating the high-cost executive network, sending a strong signal that computational work is ongoing, which directly counteracts the natural buildup of that adenosine break.
Precisely. And this is in stark contrast to the undisputed sleep disruptors, which are much easier to map onto our system model.
Like using screens.
Using screens or any electronic device with an illuminated screen, especially for 2 hours or more before bed.
That's a double whammy, right? You've got the blue light suppressing melatonin, and the constantly refreshing feed forces micro-decisions and constant task switching, which generates maximum attention residue.
It creates a total system overload right when the brain is trying to transition into its low excitability recovery state. And finally, diet plays a huge role in the energy budget.
Right.
Consuming dinner as your largest meal of the day, or consuming caffeine after 6:00 p.m., was associated with shorter sleep duration and much higher odds of poor sleep quality. These are clear system inputs that disrupt the metabolic transition required for deep recovery.
So routines are the essential filters to manage all these inputs correctly. Okay, so we've established the neurological necessity of routines. They conserve energy, they automate decisions, they align our biological clocks. But we all know the reality. Routines fail.
We fall off the wagon.
We fall off the wagon, the checklist becomes a chore, and we feel like we just lack discipline. We need to talk about why compliance fails and how to design systems that are inherently resilient to human error.
And most routines fail because they mistake a systemic friction problem for a personal failing. They're compliance-heavy, not brain-friendly. Hashtag TagTag 4.1. Why forced compliance fails. Ethics fatigue.
The sources introduce two really relevant concepts here: compliance fatigue and ethics fatigue. They basically quantify the high psychological toll of inefficient processes.
Right. Compliance fatigue is that cognitive and emotional exhaustion that arises not from the rules themselves, but from the friction created by inefficient, high-cost processes.
Can you give an example?
Think of a work routine that requires you to do manual data entry across 3 different platforms, or constantly retrieve scattered information, or perform redundant steps that have no clear purpose.
So when a routine feels like just administrative overload, it's not just boring, it's an active drain on the PFC.
It's forcing high-cost, model-based processing onto a low-value task. And this cost calculation is critical when we discuss the broader idea of ethics fatigue.
How does that work?
It's an application of the opportunity cost model. When the effort required to follow a routine, especially one that's focused on, say, ethical or safety compliance, is perceived as excessive relative to the expected benefit.
The brain is strongly motivated to disengage.
Very strongly. The internal question becomes, is this 7-step sign-off process really worth the cognitive effort that I could be spending on my main project? The perceived return on investment is just too low.
And that calculation leads to cognitive overload and moral disengagement.
Exactly. And the neuroscience backs this up completely. Performance decrements, slipping up on compliance, safety, or ethical tasks, are consistently associated with decreased engagement of that prefrontal executive network.
So the system, in an act of computational self-preservation, chooses to disengage because the perceived cost is simply too high.
A sustainable routine has to minimize that friction and maximize the perceived value of compliance. Otherwise, it's doomed to fail. Hashtag TagTag 4.2, the explore-exploit trade-off in behavior.
So we need routines that are efficient, that's the exploitation part, but not so rigid that they break. This introduces that constant adaptive tension between exploiting a known path and exploring new ones, the explore-exploit trade-off.
And this is a fundamental dilemma for all organisms. Exploitation is the routine, it's sticking with the familiar option for a known reward. Exploration is innovation. It's testing unfamiliar options for an unknown but potentially higher reward.
And sustainable routines have to exist at that point of optimal balance.
They have to. A rigid, purely exploitative routine is great until the environment changes, or until the known reward starts to diminish.
That's when the routine fails. If the environment becomes volatile, or if the utility you get from your current routine falls below your expectation, the system has to trigger an adaptive shift back toward exploration. But how does the brain manage that switch?
It does it through a system called a locus coeruleus norepinephrine system, or LCA-NE system.
The brain's switchboard for attention.
That's a good way to think of it.
Yeah.
The LCNE system operates in two distinct modes. The phasic mode is associated with high task performance and focused attention. This is the optimal state for exploitation.
That's the deep flow state where you feel completely locked in on your routine.
Yes. Then there's the tonic mode. This is the exploratory state. It provokes a withdrawal of control from the current task, and it favors a broader, more diffuse attention.
And when does that get activated?
It activates when the brain senses that the current environment or routine is no longer yielding sufficient rewards compared to expectations. This motivates the brain to start sampling new behaviors, to explore.
This means a truly resilient routine has to have moments of reflective evaluation built into it.
It has to. If the reward, the utility, is consistently low, the routine shouldn't rely on brute force compliance. It should actually prompt the system into that tonic exploratory mode to seek a better routine altogether.
So the system failure isn't the individual's lack of willpower, it's the routine's lack of built-in responsiveness.
Exactly. A resilient system is exploitative enough to conserve energy, but it's flexible enough that when the environment changes or the reward drops, the LCNE system is prompted to move into exploration to update the behavior model. Hashtag 4.3 rituals as infrastructure for self-regulation.
Okay, let's pivot from the systemic design back to the individual experience of failure. Because when we try a new routine and we fail, we miss a morning workout. We eat the impulse meal, the emotional cost, the frustration, and the self-criticism, that can completely derail the next day.
Oh, absolutely. We need to manage that emotional cost.
And that is precisely what performance rituals are designed to do. They don't necessarily guarantee better performance, but they influence our goal-regulated behavior by strategically regulating the brain's internal response to personal failure.
Yeah, there was a key experiment that demonstrated this exact neurological effect.
Tell us about it.
In the study, participants performed an arbitrary, novel ritual, just a short sequence of actions, before they engaged in an executive function task. And the researchers were measuring something called the error-related negativity, or EARN.
Okay, and what is the EARN?
The EARN is a neurophysiological signal. It's believed to arise from the anterior cingulate cortex, which we can think of as the brain's internal alarm system.
The oops signal.
The oops signal, yeah. It spikes immediately after a person recognizes they've made an error or failed at a task. It's the neurological signature of performance failure and the distress that comes with it.
So if I make a mistake, my internal alarm system screams at me. What did the ritual do to that signal?
Completing the arbitrary ritual before the task resulted in a significantly reduced EARN. The ritual acted as a cognitive buffer. It dulled that neurophysiological spike of negative emotion that's associated with a self-generated failure.
So the ritual literally quieted the inner self-critic. It acted as an emotional shock absorber.
That's it, exactly. And critically, this dampened EARN signal did not lead to worse performance. This suggests the ritual functions as a palliative. It minimizes the anxiety, the uncertainty, and the affective distress caused by minor failures.
Without sacrificing the cognitive control, you need to actually correct the mistake.
Right.
That is the definition of resilience. So routines, when we consciously frame them as rituals, become this infrastructure that's designed to manage the emotional cost of self-correction.
They allow us to forgive the error and immediately get back on the path, rather than letting the shame or frustration of one misstep spiral into a total systemic shutdown.
They ensure that the inevitable slip-up doesn't trigger an outsized, high-cost emotional response that further drains the prefrontal resources we need for the next day's decisions.
That's the protective power of ritual. Hashtag tag outro.
So this deep dive has shown us that the feeling we call discipline or willpower, it's really just the subjective experience of paying the highest biological tax. It's the opportunity cost of using those high-level cognitive processes.
The goal isn't to just endure the pain of willpower. The goal is to design a system where willpower is rarely even required. By establishing routines, you are strategically automating those costs. You're converting that high-cost decision-making into low-cost, efficient habit.
We've provided the biological blueprint. Routines are not restrictions on your freedom, they are infrastructure. They are prepaid mental energy budgets designed to protect that high-cost executive network, maintain your circadian alignment, and channel your effort toward the goals that have the highest subjective value for you.
Right. And now, for one final provocative thought for you to chew on.
Let's have it.
We saw that the brain's capacity for major learning and network reorganization, that metaplasticity, it appears to peak when the brain is most mentally exhausted. right when that adenosine break is strongest and excitability is low. So if this adaptive window truly favors deep structural integration, ask yourself, what high-value complex tasks are you currently pushing to your fresh, high-excitability morning hours that might be better reserved for that protected, low-excitability window right before you rest?
It suggests we might need to fundamentally redesign our daily schedule.
We might. Using routines not just to conserve energy, but to strategically optimize for deep, lasting change.
Your brain is trying to learn, even when it's tired. Go design your system to let it.
If this helped reboot your human OS, subscribe for daily upgrades. Drop a comment on what new update you installed today. Share this with someone running on low battery.